It was still dark, but Clara Weiss was already awake. She stood motionless at the edge of the bed, silently watching her mother, Helene, lying feebly between two old blankets, her parched lips slightly parted as she breathed heavily. Beads of sweat dotted her forehead, as if she had developed a fever during the night. The glass of water on the bedside table remained untouched, just as full as when Clara had poured it the night before. The small room the two of them shared on Kilburn Street was shrouded in a dim gray light, mingled with the damp smell clinging to the walls. No one spoke. Helene tried to turn over, whispering almost inaudibly, "I need to get up. Still have to go to Belgrave." But her voice faded, her words drifting into the air like cold smoke. Clara simply bowed her head for a moment, saying nothing. She turned away, her small feet making no sound on the cold wooden floor. In the corner of the room, under the mop rack, was a dark blue apron folded over a small stool. Clara picked it up, brushed it off gently, and slipped it over her head. The apron, meant for an adult, hung down to her shins. The waist ties had to wrap around her twice to fit snugly. She didn't glance at her mother again. She walked over to the mirror hanging crookedly on the wall. Its plastic frame yellowed with age, the surface slightly clouded, and looked directly at her reflection. A 10-year-old child in an adult's apron, left hand holding a rag, right hand tying up her hair. Her face was set, unshaken. No pretending. In the kitchen, she grabbed the canvas backpack hanging behind the door, stuffing it with a jar of oats cooked the night before, an oversized pair of rubber gloves, several rags, and a spray bottle of diluted vinegar. Before leaving, Clara took 3 coins from the salt jar next to the stove, enough for bus fare, then carefully wrote a small note in her slanted handwriting. "I'm going in your place. We'll be back before 3. Clara." She placed the note next to the kettle, where Helene would see it upon waking. Clara didn't kiss her mother, didn't say goodbye, but before opening the door, she glanced once more at the bed. Helene was still breathing slowly, but steadily. Clara opened the door and stepped outside. The city had no idea the little girl had just left home. But that didn't matter. Bus number 16 arrived 4 minutes late. Clara waited under the dripping awning, the apron neatly rolled up under her coat. When the bus arrived, she climbed on without hesitation and sat by the window. Raindrops streamed down the glass, blurring the view of gray brick buildings retreating into the distance. She didn't look out much. In her head, she was repeating the rules her mother had taught her. Don't talk too much. Don't stare. Knock twice, never 3 times. And most importantly, always stay small, clean, and silent. Belgrave Square emerged like a framed painting, white, quiet, and polished from the inside out. Clara got off the bus, backpack over her shoulder, eyes fixed on number 12, one of the most well-known penthouses in the area. She had been here a few times before, always with her mother. This time she was alone. As she approached, the doorman, Mr. O'Leary, stood in the glass booth. He saw Clara and paused. "You are?" he asked, voice low and polite but slightly wary. "Helene Weiss's daughter," Clara replied, unblinking. "My mother is sick today. I'm taking the shift." The older man tilted his head, his gaze sweeping over the apron peeking from under her coat and the backpack full of supplies. After a short pause, he nodded and pressed the elevator button without another word. Clara stepped into the lift, its yellow light reflecting her image on 3 mirrored walls. In the reflection, she looked both small and silent and utterly purposeful. 6th floor. The elevator doors opened soundlessly. Clara walked to apartment 6A, where Mrs. Von Hagen lived with her husband. She knocked twice. Not 3. Not slow. The door opened, not by the maid as usual, but by Elena Von Hagen herself. She wore a charcoal gray suit, her hair in a neat bun, a phone pressed to her ear. Her eyes passed over Clara with a momentary pause. Not quite surprise, more an assessment. "Laundry room. Magda's waiting," she said without breaking her call, then turned and walked away. Clara bowed her head slightly, did not answer. Elena's perfume trailed behind her. Cold, expensive, and sharp as honed steel. Clara stepped inside. The apartment unfolded like a living museum. Gleaming white marble floors, large glass doors opening to a balcony lined with pruned plants, and modern paintings hanging with perfect precision. She moved quickly, remembering her mother's advice. Don't look. Don't stop. Don't lose yourself in things that aren't yours. The laundry room was at the end of the hall. Magda, the head maid, didn't speak much. She handed Clara a mop, pointed to the corner of the kitchen floor, and muttered a few words in Polish that Clara didn't understand. But she already knew what to do. She knelt, bent forward, left hand gripping the mop handle, right hand adjusting the pressure. Pressure and patience, not speed, her mother used to say. As she was mopping the hallway that led to the library, Clara heard voices behind a partially open door. A woman's voice, tense and low. He can't know. The account in Zurich's been moved clean. A second voice, trembling slightly. Are you sure? You signed it without leaving a trace. Yes, we just need to distract him for one more week. A drawer shut. Footsteps moved away. Clara didn't turn around. She kept cleaning, steady and silent. But her heart beat faster, and the words, Zurich, account, distract, began to embed themselves in her memory like tiny needles. Adults often thought children didn't understand, but Clara did. Not every detail, but she understood the tension in those voices, the urgency when people had something to hide. Later, Elena appeared again, this time silently, without warning. Clara was cleaning under the console table when the woman stopped beside her. No call, no signal. Where's your mother? She asked, voice as flat as asking about the weather. Clara didn't look up. She's ill. Elena said nothing. After a brief pause, she walked away. Clara wasn't sure if that was an acceptance or another test, but she felt, somehow, that she had passed something. About half an hour later, as Clara folded the used rags in the laundry room, she heard the door open. Heavy, slow footsteps. When she turned around, a tall man in a light gray shirt, no tie, hair tousled as if after a sleepless night, stood looking at her. Alexander von Hagen, the husband. He looked at Clara, not with surprise, not distantly, but as if trying to remember why she was there. You're Clara? He asked. She nodded. Thank you for helping, he said, his voice tired, but sincere. For the first time all day, Clara smiled. Just a little, just enough for the light from the large window to catch her cheek. When she left the apartment, apron removed, rags washed and hung neatly in the laundry, Clara felt as though she had completed something far greater than just cleaning a floor. She didn't know exactly what she had stepped into, but one thing was certain. This was no ordinary job. The second time Clara Weiss returned to penthouse number 12 on Belgrave Square, it was still raining, though more softly. Her brown hair was tied more neatly than the last time, and the apron had been washed clean and left to dry overnight. Helene was better. Well enough to get up, cook porridge, and brush her daughter's hair, though not strong enough to fight off the needle-sharp headache that stabbed with every movement. She didn't stop Clara from going. She only said, if anyone asks, just tell them your mother trusts you. Clara didn't need anyone to trust her. She only needed to work quietly and listen. That day, the penthouse was unusually silent. Mr. O'Leary nodded as he opened the door, this time without a word. Clara took the elevator alone, stepped out at the same place, and knocked twice on the heavy wooden door of apartment 6A. The door opened more slowly than usual, and it was Magda, the maid, who greeted her. Her face was stiff as stone, blonde hair pulled tightly back at the nape. Without a greeting, she handed Clara a handwritten list of chores in messy English. Kitchen, hallway, living room, reading room. It looked like a normal list, but Clara noticed something odd. Reading room. That room had always been locked. She'd passed it many times. The dark brown door without a number, the polished brass handle untouched by fingerprints. Inside, always dark, always silent. Her mother once said, never open it, understand? Even if you see it slightly ajar, don't touch it. Today, reading room sat at the end of the list, slanted slightly, as if by mistake or as a silent test. Clara followed the order. mopped the marble hallway, wiped the glass cabinet of crystal glasses, changed the hand towels in the living room. Everything flowed smoothly, each task repeating with the rhythm she had memorized like choreography in a classical dance. Only her heartbeat was out of sync. It had gone off tempo ever since she stood in front of that library door. She tried pushing it gently, locked. She bent down to peer under. Pure darkness, dead quiet. She wiped down the outside surfaces, though there was no dust. As she crouched to clean the baseboard, she heard a sound, faint as fabric brushing the floor, from inside that room. She froze. Then another sound, click, like the snap of a metal lid being shut. Then nothing. Clara didn't call anyone. She simply pressed her ear against the door, held her breath, and waited. Nothing. No footsteps. No scraping chair. No whisper. Just a strange kind of silence. The silence of something alive trying not to be noticed. She walked away and continued her tasks as usual. But from that moment, two other doors in the penthouse began to haunt her. One was a white door at the far end of the eastern hallway, across from the master bedroom. Silver-plated handle. No nameplate. Always closed. She had never once seen it open. It was never mentioned on the task list. No signs of use, no smudges, no handprints. But every time Clara passed it, she felt as if something were watching her from behind that door, as though it were holding its breath along with her. The other was smaller, a cabinet door set into the main hallway wall. Unlocked, but never opened. On its surface sat a small stone statue, a boy in a cap, reading a book. Clara had once asked her mother about the statue, and Helene had simply said, "Don't touch it, it's personal." That afternoon, as Clara was mopping the hallway for the second time, Mrs. Von Hagen appeared, as though she had stepped straight out of the wall. Elena stood directly in front of the white door, her fingers lightly touching the handle but not turning it. Clara looked up at that exact moment. Mrs. Von Hagen didn't open the door. She only looked at it, for a long while. Her face was pale, her lips pressed tight, and her eyes distant, as though she were being pulled into a past from which she could not return. Then she turned and noticed Clara a few meters away. She didn't shout, didn't question. She only looked, so long that Clara instinctively bowed her head in apology. When she looked up again, Elena was gone. That evening, back home, Clara didn't tell her mother about the door. She ate porridge, did her math homework, and read an old short story. But in her mind, the doors returned, one after another, like blind spots on a map. Something in that house was not right. Not some obvious wrong. Just too much silence. Too many things that were always closed, and no one ever asked why. And Clara was the only one who noticed. That afternoon, the London sky couldn't seem to decide whether it wanted rain or sun. Gray clouds gathered, then drifted away like smoke, leaving behind a faint, hazy light that washed over the white buildings and trees around Belgrave Square. Clara had just finished polishing the crystal glasses in the dining room when Magda handed her a small slip of paper, written in slightly smudged blue fountain pen ink. South Terrace, check for rain marks. She had never been out to the south balcony. It was the one place she had only ever seen through the thick glass doors, where a few olive trees sat in Italian clay pots, and a white-painted iron bench rested atop a patch of mosaic tiles. No one ever went out there when she was around. It was a quiet, distant space, as if it belonged to someone else or to no one at all. Clara opened the heavy glass door and immediately felt how different the outside air was from indoors. Softer, tinged with the scent of damp metal, real leaves, and the faint sweetness of a half-eaten biscuit. She stepped out lightly, as if the tiled floor might crack under a heavy step. Holding her cloth, she began to wipe down the doorframe and the bench. A few streaks of rainwater still lingered on the tiles. It was a simple task requiring no thought, but Clara didn't stop at the motions. She listened, as she always did, for sounds behind the barely open door. There were none. No footsteps, no voices. And then, from her right, a low voice spoke. Not loud, not startling, just enough to make her turn her head. "This balcony doesn't get many visitors," said Alexander von Hagen, standing a few meters away, hands in his sweater pockets, shoulders relaxed like someone who had just emerged from a long meeting. Clara didn't know how long he'd been there. Maybe he hadn't planned to speak. Maybe he'd only meant to stand and watch. Clara set the cloth down, still holding one edge. She gave a small nod, the kind meant as a polite response, not an answer. Alexander stepped forward a pace, unhurried, without intent. He looked slowly around the balcony, then said, almost to himself, "I used to sit here every morning." He said used to, but not with whom. Clara didn't interrupt. She stood straight, hands clasped in front as her mother had taught her when facing a guest. But her eyes remained wide open. Not afraid, just still. He looked at her. This time he really looked. As if it was the first time his gaze had lingered long enough on someone's face in this house. Not out of curiosity, but in search of something solid. And then he asked gently, "How old are you?" 10, Clara answered. Barely above a whisper, but without hesitation. Alexander nodded. His expression shifted slightly, as though recalculating something in his mind. 10 years old and already working, he repeated. Not as criticism, just an acknowledgement, something said aloud to remember it. Clara didn't reply. She felt no need to explain. She had been doing this work for a long time. If not with her hands, then with her eyes. Watching her mother, memorizing how to wipe a window pane, fold a towel, choose the right cleaner for each type of wood surface. They fell silent for a while. A breeze swept through, rustling the silver olive leaves under the pale evening light. Alexander sat down on the bench. No invitation, no implication. Just sat, tired, but not unkind. "Would you like to sit?" he asked, his voice soft, like wind drifting through tea steam. Clara hesitated. Then she sat at the far end of the bench, back straight, hands folded in her lap. "Has anyone ever sat here with you?" she asked, surprised to hear herself speak. Alexander turned his face away, not to avoid her, but as if pulled into an old memory. "Once," he said quietly, "but not anymore." Clara didn't ask why. She didn't need to know the reason. It was enough to understand that his silence was real, and that he wasn't sharing it through a story, but through presence. They sat like that for several minutes, saying nothing more. Just a man carrying darkness in his eyes, and a cleaning girl who understood how to sit still. Before standing, Alexander reached into his inner pocket and pulled out a quarter-folded sheet of paper. Small, old, with one torn edge. He looked at it for a moment, then handed it to Clara. "I won't be home tomorrow," he said. "But you'll come, won't you?" Clara nodded. "Give this to your mother, if she thinks she needs it." She took the note with both hands, folded it tightly, didn't ask what it was. Then she bowed and left the balcony, cloth still in hand. In the hallway, where cold tiles met thick, stifling walls, Clara felt something had changed. Not much, but clearly. She was no longer just an anonymous hired girl. She had sat down. Someone had sat with her, and silence had begun to echo. The note Alexander had given her the day before still lay untouched in the pocket of Clara's uniform as she stepped into penthouse number 12 the next morning. She hadn't opened it. Her mother, Helene, hadn't asked. Perhaps she sensed this was the kind of paper one doesn't touch too soon. Not out of fear, but because it belonged to a man who carried silence instead of explanations. Clara worked as usual. Cleaned the windows, refreshed the flowers in the dining room, straightened the cushions on the white sofa. She remembered her mother's words. Do everything as if someone's eyes are watching from behind the walls. But today no one watched. Elena didn't appear. Magda left right after handing her the task list. The apartment felt hollow. So quiet that the sound of a cloth touching stone echoed like snowfall. In the laundry room, Clara was sorting the used rags into the machine when she noticed something odd at the bottom of the basket. Something hard, black, angular. She pulled it out. A small voice recorder, handheld, its plastic surface scratched as if dropped multiple times, but the buttons intact. No brand, no cords. She turned it over in her hands. Heavy, real. There was nothing about it that belonged to her except for one thing. It had been hidden, tucked among clean towels, beneath 3 layers of folded fabric. Someone like Magda would never be careless. Clara knew that. Every towel, every bottle was always in place with cold precision. But this recorder, it hadn't fallen. It had been placed. She checked the side. A play button. No headphones. No lock. No warning. Clara glanced around. Absolute silence. She pressed play. A soft click. Then a voice. Elena von Hagen. But not the Elena of afternoon teas or quiet commands. This was a different Elena, low, composed, dangerous as glacial ice. He's not well. Worse every day. I'll keep him distracted, trust me. The Zurich account must be moved before anything happens. A pause. I've already signed. No trace. He won't find it. The sound of metal lightly tapping a glass surface. Silence. No music. No breath. No end of message. Clara stood still, fingers clenched around the recorder as if it might explode. She didn't fully understand all the words, but she understood the tone. That voice needed no translation. It was strategy. It was control. It was deception, spoken with the ease of someone who had practiced 100 times. She turned off the recorder, set it down, but a few seconds later, she picked it up again. She played it once more. The words were the same. The voice unchanged, but this time Clara heard every pause. She heard certainty, no hesitation, no caution, as if Elena had done this before. And he was Alexander. Clara didn't know anything about bank accounts or Zurich or inheritance laws, but she knew one thing. Someone was keeping something big from him. She remembered the look in his eyes as he sat beside her on the balcony. It wasn't the look of a man who was not well. It was the look of someone forgotten. She wrapped the recorder in a hand towel and carefully placed it at the bottom of her supply bag. Her hands were shaking, not out of fear of being caught, but because she knew. From this moment on, she was no longer just the girl who cleaned floors. Clara had crossed the line between seeing and knowing. She left the laundry room and finished her chores as usual. Near the balcony, she glanced through the glass. The terrace was empty. No one waiting with a quiet question. No warm silence. The apartment was still picture-perfect, but the light now felt colder. The white walls no longer reflected the sun. They seemed to absorb it, draining meaning from everything around. As she left, Clara walked slowly down the hallway where the door always stayed locked. She didn't try to open it. She didn't need to. She had already unlocked something else. Something invisible but far bigger. The truth. Outside, Mr. O'Leary gave his usual nod. But this time, Clara didn't nod back. She tightened her grip on her backpack strap and walked quickly past him, like someone carrying something that must not fall into the wrong hands. That afternoon, Clara didn't turn on the radio like she usually did. She didn't do her homework. She didn't read. She just sat by the window, fingers touching the edge of the handkerchief in her bag. The one holding the recorder. She had heard. And now she had to decide, not whether to speak, but when. Thursday morning, the atmosphere in penthouse number 12 on Belgrave Square seemed much the same as always. White light poured through the tall windows, and the scent of bergamot oil drifted from the diffuser near the master bedroom. But Clara Weiss sensed something had changed. Not from the people, from the walls. Walls don't speak. But if you stay long enough, you can feel when a house changes its mood. Magda wasn't there that morning. A younger maid, named Ilse, greeted Clara at the door, nervousness written across her forehead. Mrs. von Hagen isn't leaving her room today, Ilse whispered. She said, "You know what needs doing." Clara nodded. She did. She began with the library, the room usually kept locked but recently left open. Not quite an invitation, just no longer hidden. Clara dusted the surfaces, wiped the leather chairs, rearranged the books in the order someone had decided long ago. Even when brushing the spines, she could feel control layered into every object. Everything here was arranged by the memory of someone trying not to touch the past. While cleaning the low cabinet near the wall, Clara's fingers struck something hard and angular, wedged between the floor and the baseboard. She bent down. A torn envelope. One corner still damp, as if it had been water-stained. No return name. The faint address was printed in an old-style italic. P.O. Box in Lucerne, Switzerland. Not Zurich like before, but not London either. She opened the envelope, hands trembling. Inside was half a letter torn clean across. Only the top remained. Handwritten. Crooked lines. Hasty or angry. Clara read silently, each word sinking into her slowly. Alexander, I tried to tell you. I truly did. But by the time I could, everything was already too late. I couldn't keep the name. I couldn't keep the promise. If you still remember, the last line ended mid-thought. No punctuation. No final letter. The bottom half was missing, or hidden. Clara placed the letter back in the envelope, intending to return it to its place, but her hand froze. On the back of the envelope, faint but legible, was a red ink stamp, 3 cursive letters, J, L, V. Written in brush pen. Clara had never seen anyone in this house sign that way. J, L, V. Julian? No one in the household had a name that started with J. But there was something Clara had never seen in the entire penthouse. No baby photos. None in the bedrooms. None in the hall. Not a single toy. The apartment was immaculate, orderly, but far too empty to have once held a child's laughter. She remembered the white door at the far end of the eastern hallway. Always locked. Every time Clara walked past it, Elena looked away, an involuntary reflex. And she remembered Alexander's voice on the balcony. I used to sit here every morning. A routine not continued alone. As Clara returned the envelope, she discovered one more item, barely visible beneath the cabinet. A neonatal hospital bracelet. This white plastic had yellowed. On its face, Julian L. V. D.O.B. February 3, 2021. Clara didn't need confirmation. Julian von Hagen. A child. Someone who had existed. A name wiped from the walls, the frames, the stories. She placed everything back exactly as she'd found it. The envelope angled 15 degrees from the cabinet's edge. The bracelet tucked beneath. No trace. No presence. That afternoon, Clara cleaned the white door again. Just cleaned, never touched the handle. But when she bent near the bottom, she noticed a tiny scratch, barely visible, like something metallic had been dragged through the gap, once, long ago. She rested her hand gently against the door. No sound, no pressure. Her heart beat slowly. She wasn't thinking about financial plots or Zurich or voice recorders. She was thinking about a boy, Julian, a child who had once been here and was now gone. A room locked like a forgotten name. A father who never spoke of him. A mother with grief hardened into stone. When Clara left the penthouse that day, she walked more slowly than usual, as if every tile in the hallway was whispering a story. Not in words, but in the silence adults refused to explain. That morning, Clara arrived 15 minutes late. Not because of the bus. Not because her mother had asked questions. She had simply stood for a long time in front of the door, staring at the ash-gray sky, neither raining nor clear, with a feeling she didn't know how to name. She didn't know why, but as she entered the building, her fingers clenched her backpack strap a little tighter. She could feel something would be different. Not from the people, but from the air. The apartment was quieter than usual. No vacuum, no heels clicking, no perfume, only the faint smell of buttercream and vanilla, trailing from the foyer to the kitchen. Clara stepped in and saw it immediately. On the marble island stood a birthday cake. Round, covered in white frosting. Almond slices around the edge. On top, written in sea blue icing, in perfect cursive, as if someone had practiced it for hours, were the words, "Happy birthday, Alexander." No plates, no candles, no knife, just the untouched cake. Clara stood still. No one needed to explain. She knew it was his birthday, and clearly, whoever prepared the cake hadn't stayed to give it. She continued working in silence. While wiping the wooden staircase, she heard familiar footsteps, heavy, unhurried, coming down the hallway. Alexander von Hagen appeared. No suit, no tie, just a charcoal sweater and soft trousers. his hair tousled, his eyes dimmer than usual. Not someone celebrating a birthday. Clara bowed her head. Alexander nodded. When he entered the kitchen and saw the cake, he stopped. Didn't approach. Didn't speak. Just looked. One beat. Two. Then he exhaled, not relief, but the kind of sound one makes when realizing they should never have expected anything at all. Clara didn't face him directly, but from the oven's reflection, she saw his shoulders. The only part of him that moved was his right hand, thumb pressing lightly into his palm. "Does your mother bake?" he asked softly. A question meant not to fill silence, but to avoid drowning in it. "Yes," Clara answered, "but simpler ones." He nodded. "Every year, she ordered a cake for my birthday. Even after. Clara knew he meant Elena. But what made her chest ache wasn't that Elena had forgotten. It was that he had believed she would remember. Clara wanted to say something, but she didn't know how to speak without making it worse. So she said nothing. Instead, she did the only thing she could do without permission. She sat on a nearby chair and pulled from her backpack a folded napkin. Paper worn. Drawn in heavy pencil was a sketch. The balcony where they had once sat. The bench. The olive trees. And between them, a small plate of cookies. Like the one he'd left for her the first time they spoke. She pushed the napkin toward him. Silent. Alexander looked at it for a long while. Didn't pick it up. Just let his eyes rest on it. And, for the first time that day, they softened. "You remembered." 3 quiet words. But inside them, an earthquake. Clara nodded. "No one else remembers that," he whispered. "I think people forget the truly important things," Clara said slowly, as if learning how to say aloud what she usually kept in her mind. "But not because they don't care. Just because they're afraid to remember." Alexander looked up at her. His eyes, no longer dim, met hers. Not from above. Not from afar. But as one human seeing another. No titles. No ages. Just the truth. Without a word, he reached into his pocket and took out a small envelope. Inside, an embossed invitation card with silver edges. He handed it to her. "For your mother. And if she agrees, you may start next term." Clara opened it gently. An admission letter. Private school. A place she had never dared imagine entering on a full scholarship. The final line, handwritten. "For the girl who listened when no one else did." Clara said nothing. She just held the envelope tightly. It wasn't a reward. It was an answer. A way of saying, "I see you." Before she left, Alexander spoke. Softly, almost to himself. "Some days, I think I've been erased from this world. Today, you proved me wrong." Clara looked at him one last time, then left. No one ate the cake that day, but someone was remembered. Clara slept little that night. The scholarship letter lay snug beneath her pillow beside the voice recorder wrapped in a handkerchief. She still hadn't told her mother, not because Helene would object, but because something inside her wouldn't yet let words pin everything down. Ever since she had listened to the tape a second time, Clara understood. Truth is only truly truth when it is faced by the person who must hear it. If she held on to it too long, it would turn into a secret, and Clara had already lived long enough inside rooms full of secrets. The following morning, the air was colder than usual. Clara crossed the penthouse's glass doors with slower steps. Not out of hesitation, but because she knew today would be different. No longer a day for merely dusting and scrubbing. Alexander was home. Clara could tell the moment she entered, not by seeing him but by the light in the hallway. The corridor lamps, usually lit only halfway, were all aglow. Someone had been up early. Elena was nowhere to be seen. Magda left the moment she handed over the day's list. Ilsa was arranging flowers in the kitchen. No one noticed Clara slip along the west corridor, fingers tightening around the recorder in her pocket. She wasn't sure what she would say. She only knew the recorder had to be given back. One more day in her hands was too long. Alexander was standing alone on the terrace, where they had once sat together, where she had sketched the bench and the plate of biscuits in gray pencil. He wore a dark wool coat, one hand in his pocket, the other holding a cup of coffee gone cold. Wind rustled the olive leaves, sending a few drifting onto the tiles. Clara said nothing. She stepped outside, stopped 2 meters away, drew out the handkerchief and unfolded it, revealing the small black recorder, edges scuffed. Alexander turned, surprise flickering across his face, but he asked nothing. He waited. Clara stretched out her hand and set the recorder in his palm. "Listen to it. Once. Alone," she said. No explanation. No Elena, no Zurich, no talk of accounts. Just a child's silence presenting an adult with something he should have found long ago. Alexander closed his fingers over the device, thumb resting on play, eyes never leaving hers as if to be sure this wasn't some cruel trick. Clara nodded. He pressed. Elena's voice filled the quiet air. Unmistakable. Inexcusable. "He's not well. Worse every day. I'll keep him busy, trust me. The Zurich account has to be moved before anything happens. I've signed already. No links. He'll never find it." The message ended. No more proof needed. Clara saw him freeze like ice. No shouting, no rage. Just the stillness of faith draining dry. One hand clenched around the recorder, the other fell slack. She noticed his fingers tremble. His eyes went hollow for seconds, then blinked fast, like a man struck by a blow he never saw coming. "How long has she been doing this?" he asked, his voice caught. Clara shook her head. "I don't know, but it doesn't sound new." He said nothing else, staring into the space ahead where the olive tree stood as if refusing to witness. After a while he turned back, sad still but no longer blurred. "Thank you," he said. Clara didn't nod. She folded the empty handkerchief and walked away. He needed to meet the storm alone. Halfway through the door, his voice called, quiet but firm. "Clara!" She turned. "I won't let this stay buried," he said. She nodded. The first shout cracked from the living room, echoing down 2 hallways. Elena's voice, whip-sharp. "Where did you hear that?" His reply rang out, not loud but steely. "Doesn't matter. What matters is, I've heard." Clara needed no more. The clash had begun. She told no one what happened. Not her mother, not her notebook. That afternoon, as she wiped the familiar white door, her hands felt unexpectedly light, as if, for the first time in weeks, she had nothing left to keep hidden. She had returned the truth to the one who needed it. The rest was adult business. 2 days later, penthouse number 12 did not open readily for Clara. She rang 3 times, waited. Only on the 4th did the door crack open. Not Magda, not Ilsa, but Elena herself. Her face was pale, free of makeup. Her wool robe hung half-buttoned. Clara started to bow, yet Elena merely stepped aside without a word. Inside, something had been dismantled and the pieces not swept away. A living room curtain was crooked. A picture frame lay shattered on a side table. The familiar perfume hovered, thinned, mixed with the acrid scent of spent candle wax. No one spoke to Clara all morning. No tasks assigned, no questions asked. She found the laundry room on her own, gloved up and began working, as if silence itself were the order. Only when she was wiping the built-in cupboard in the East Hall, the one always closed beneath the stone boy statue, did she notice. The door was no longer locked. Her hand settled on the knob. Resistance melted. Inside sat a brown cardboard box, carry-on size, sealed with faded tape. No label, no note. Clara knelt. Every part of her whispered, "Don't." Yet her fingers found the tape's edge, peeled it gently. No tearing, no folding, just opening. As if someone had shut the lid and waited for a stranger to discover it. Inside were things that had no place in this perfect apartment. A pale beige baby blanket, the corner embroidered with a single J. A tiny pillow half-yellowed by time. A sheaf of photographs, grainy black and white. A large-eyed infant cradled by a younger, softer Elena. A birth certificate, Julian Louis von Hagen, March 2nd, 2021. And at the bottom, a death certificate, pale green, congenital heart defect 6 months later. The apartment seemed to shrink, for walls pressing in. Outside was silent, but inside Clara's head a storm roared. Julian. The boy with no photos on the walls, no toys, no Memorial Day. Not forgotten, simply boxed away. She brushed a fingertip over one photograph. The eyes staring out were not unlike those she saw in her own mirror. Not in likeness, but in the shared knowledge that silence can be survival. Her hand rested on the box edge. Don't reorganize it. The voice came from behind. Clara turned. Elena stood there. Not angry, not frantic. Just empty, like someone who had seen the storm pass and lacked the strength to rebuild. Clara rose, head bowed. But Elena offered no scolding. She stepped forward, knelt by the box, and smoothed a palm over the top photograph. No one is supposed to touch this. That was the rule. Clara stayed silent. Elena's voice was paper-thin. He looked at Julian's photos every night. Before I put them away. Why? Clara asked, not from curiosity but because someone needed to be asked so she could speak. Elena closed her eyes. Because I couldn't bear watching him still hope. Hope for what? That the pain would ease. A long silence. Elena stood. No one should lose a child like that, she whispered. No one should go on as if it never happened. But I tried. And when I saw you here She stopped. Not from pain, but from fear that allowing the sentence to live would crack every wall. Clara did not look away. Elena turned. Put everything back exactly as it was, she said, and walked off. Clara replaced each item precisely, but this time with reverence. She knew she had stepped into the deepest forbidden zone of the house. Not the locked room, not the hidden files, but the grief petrified into stone. Before closing the lid, she slipped a small yellow paper clip from her own pocket onto the edge of Julian's photo, as if marking the last page of a story never finished. Then she shut the box. Softly, without a sound. Penthouse number 12 on Belgrave Square did not open its door to Clara the way it usually did. She had to ring the bell 3 times and wait. No footsteps sounded inside. Only on the 4th ring did the door crack open. Not Magda, not Ilse, but Elena von Hagen herself, her face paler than usual, unmade up, the buttons of her wool robe left undone. Clara meant to bow, yet Elena merely stepped aside without a word. She entered and understood at once. Something had been dismantled, and the pieces had not been swept away. The living room curtains hung crooked. A shattered frame lay face up on a side table. The familiar perfume lingered in the air, but thinly, as if sprayed by a trembling hand. And the smell of candles. Ash, faintly sour, source unclear. No one spoke to Clara all morning. No tasks assigned, no questions asked, no figures moving in the corridors. She found the laundry room on her own, pulled on gloves, took up a cloth, and began to work as though silence itself were in order. Only when she was polishing the built-in cupboard in the East Hall, the one always closed beneath the stone boy statue, did she notice the door was no longer locked. Her hand settled on the knob. She did not resist. Inside stood a brown cardboard box the size of a carry-on case, taped shut with faded packing tape. No label, no note. Clara knelt. Every part of her said, "Don't open it." Yet her fingers sought the end of the tape, peeling it gently. No tearing, no folding. Just opening, as though someone had closed the lid and waited for a stranger to find it. Inside were things that did not belong in this immaculate apartment. A pale beige baby blanket, the corner embroidered with a single J. A tiny pillow, half-yellowed, half-faded with time. A sheaf of misty black and white photographs. An infant, wide-eyed Juan, cradled by a younger, softer Elena. A birth record, Julian Louis von Hagen, born March 2, 2021. And beneath it all, a death certificate on pale green paper. Cause, congenital heart defect. Date of death, 6 months after birth. The apartment seemed to shrink, for walls pressing in. Outside, silence. Inside Clara's head, a storm. Julian. A child with no pictures on the walls, no toys, no anniversary. A name never spoken. Not forgotten but boxed away. Clara brushed her fingertip over the photo. The eyes in the image were not unlike the eyes she saw in her own mirror. Not from resemblance, but from a shared knowledge that silence can be a survival skill. Her hand rested on the box's rim. "Don't rearrange it." The voice came from behind. Clara turned. Elena stood there, not angry, not panicked, merely empty, like someone who had watched the storm pass and no longer had strength to rebuild. Clara rose, head bowed. Elena offered no reproach. She stepped forward, knelt by the box, and smoothed her hand over the first photograph. "No one is to touch it. That was the rule." Clara said nothing. Elena's voice was as thin as paper. "He looked at Julian's photos every night. Before I put them away." "Why?" Clara asked, not from curiosity, but because someone needed the question in order to speak. Elena closed her eyes. "Because I couldn't bear to see him still hope." "Hope for what?" "That the pain would ease." A long silence. Elena stood. "No one should lose a child like that," she whispered. "No one should go on as if it never happened. But I tried. And when I saw you here, The sentence broke. Not from pain, but from fear that letting it exist would crack every wall. Clara did not look away. Elena turned. "Put everything back exactly as it was." Then she walked off. Clara bent down and replaced each item in precise order, but this time not only with her hands, but with respect. She knew she had entered the deepest forbidden zone of the house. Not the locked room, not secret documents, but grief hardened into stone. Before closing the lid, she took a small yellow paperclip from her pocket and clipped it to the edge of Julian's photograph, as though marking the last page of a story not yet finished. Then she shut the box, gently, without a sound. 3 days after Clara opened the memory box, the Von Hagen apartment felt as though it had changed blood. The familiar people were gone. No Magda, no Ilsa, no Elena. No more scent of fresh flowers changing each day. No more sound of running water in the bathroom, or the rhythmic tapping of high heels on marble. Only Alexander remained. He was the one who opened the door for Clara. His eyes were sunken, his shirt wrinkled, but his voice steady. "You can begin in the library." There was no list of chores, no instructions, no need to pretend anything was normal. The library now stood wide open, unlocked, no longer hidden. In one corner of the desk was the old tape recorder Clara had once handed over, now placed on a silver tray like evidence in a quiet courtroom. Beside it, a thick folder with a cloth-bound spine, marked with the seal of a law office. Alexander sat in the leather chair by the window. In front of him, a tablet, a phone, and a cup of cold tea. He looked at none of them, only out the window. London that day was bright, brilliant, cloudless. Have you ever seen an adult know they've been betrayed and still stay silent? He asked, voice low, not directed at her, more like to a part of himself. Clara slowed her steps, standing by a nearby bookshelf. "I think it's how people survive, at least for a while." Alexander gave a slight nod. No disagreement. "But I'm tired now," he said. "I don't need to survive. I need the truth to survive." Clara understood. He had chosen. The doorbell rang at 11:02. Precise. Firm. Alexander stood up, unhurried. He walked toward the front hall, leaving the library door ajar. Clara didn't mean to listen, but every word traveled down the corridor like fine needles. "I know everything, Elena. Not just the accounts. Not just the proxy papers. But everything you erased from this house." Silence. Then a sharp breath, unclear from whom. "You don't understand. Everything I did was to keep you." "No. It was to keep control." Then he spoke slowly, very slowly. "I said nothing when you locked Julian's room. I said nothing when you made Magda burn his medical records. But when you erased his name from the family registry, from every document, you stopped being his mother. You became the one who killed his memory." A dry, brittle sound, like a ring of keys falling. Elena did not respond. The apartment sank into a different kind of silence. Not because no one spoke, but because every word was already too late. A while later, Alexander returned. He didn't mention what had just happened. He simply looked at Clara. I sent the recording to the law office yesterday. I also submitted the petition to divide the estate. Elena won't be staying here much longer. He sat down again. His eyes returned to the window. But what I fear isn't separation. What I fear is that the boy will die a second time, if I stay silent. Clara stepped closer, gently laid her hand on the edge of the desk. You spoke, she said. I think Julian heard. A single tear, perhaps light, perhaps salt, dropped onto his sleeve. No one mentioned it. Alexander handed Clara a small object. A silver key without a label. The Eastern room. You can open it. Not to clean, but so that someone enters. Just once. Clara took it. Said nothing. She knew this was bigger than her. But she also knew. Truth only stays alive if someone carries it beyond the room where it was smothered. The silver key sat in her palm like a pulse. Small, cold, unmarked. But when she placed it into the white door at the end of the eastern corridor, it turned with a soft click, as though waiting all these years for her hand. The door opened without a creak. No damp smell. No webs. The room inside hadn't been abandoned. Only frozen. Soft late morning light filtered through white curtains. Clara didn't turn on the light. She stepped slowly, her canvas shoes barely touching the ground. Everything inside was intact. A white wooden crib, covered with a pale mint blanket. Raised clouds on the headboard. Beside it, a rocking chair with a wool shawl draped over one armrest. A small dresser hugged the wall. 3 drawers. Clara opened the top. Tiny folded bibs, and a pair of fuzzy gray socks, embroidered with a J at the heel. On a low bookshelf near the window stood wooden toys. A train, blocks, a fabric bunny, and a snow globe. She shook it lightly. Snow rose, swirled, and fell. Inside was a baby boy smiling, wearing a blue onesie, arms raised toward something unseen. Clara scanned the room. Everything was clean, nothing broken, but nothing touched for a long, long time. In the center of the far wall, a large canvas, watercolor, and signed. Just a misty gray sky, and a single faint dot of light near the edge. Not the sun, not clearly a star. Just a speck of light amid a field of cold, blurred gray. Clara sat down on the rug, reached up to the string of a wind chime near the window, gave it the gentlest tug. A chime rang out, clear, neither sad nor glad, like the sound a soul leaves behind when it exits a place it once called home. And Clara cried, not for Julian. She never knew him. Not for Alexander or Elena. Their wounds were theirs alone. She cried for a room that had stayed silent too long. For a child who once had a name, socks, wall art, and was later packed away like a sorrowful clerical error. She cried like the child inside herself. For all things left unsaid, all names unread, all letters torn, and all the boxes someone once thought could hold memory forever. A long time later, Clara stood, breathed deeply. She didn't close the door. She left it ajar. A sign that the room had been seen, acknowledged. Entered not for cleaning, but for listening. When she returned to the living room, Alexander was waiting. No questions. No need. He looked at her, eyes a little wet. Clara spoke only once. That room still holds him. Alexander nodded. I know. Thank you for reminding me. He turned not toward the library, but to the east. Toward the room that had stayed quiet for too long. Clara stood in the hallway, her hand on the white wall. In her mind, a letter Julian never wrote, but which she could now hear clearly. Thank you for not forgetting me.